So, yeah, hi everybody. I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. For those who don't know me, I'm Bonnie Eystone. I'm the Working Lands Group Director at Point Blue, and I'm also going to be your MC for this evening. Nerd Night is a tradition that started between the Rangeland Science Team at Point Blue and TomKat Ranch Educational Foundation back in like 2015, 2016, to share about what we had learned over the past year of our monitoring efforts at the ranch and across the state. And typically, this event takes place at TomKat Ranch, where we do a ranch walk together and make ecological observations. And it's followed by a scientific presentation from our scientists, and then we have trivia over happy hour. But in 2025, we marked the 10-year anniversary of the Rangeland Monitoring Network, and we wanted to make Nerd Night accessible to everybody and be able to invite all of our RMN participants. So that's why we're having a virtual Nerd Night and invited everybody in our network, and we're so happy that you came. So tonight we are in the company of ranchers, land stewards, rangeland scientists, ecologists, foundation partners, interested community members, and our Point Blue staff. So in the spirit of Nerd Night, it's happy hour. I hope you have your favorite drink handy and some snacks handy, and let's get into it. So this evening, our RMN team will share a history of Point Blue and our Working Lands group. We'll provide a history of the work that we've done, provide a tour of our newly launched Rangeland Monitoring Network StoryMap, engage in conversation with a few of our rancher partners, and then wrap up the evening with some small group discussion for those who can stay to engage a little bit deeper with the RMN data in the StoryMap and just get to know each other a little bit more. For those who choose to stay, we'll be doing that in breakout rooms, and that will last about 20 to 25 minutes. And then we'll come back together for some final thanks and goodbyes. So for some Zoom housekeeping notes, we have our Point Blue communications manager, Lishka Arata. She is here as our tech buddy, and she will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any issues or anything, you can drop those in there, and hopefully she'll be able to help address those. And also, if you have any questions throughout the content that's shared, you can use that chat feature to load your questions in. And then we'll either follow up with you personally after the meeting, or if we have time at the end, we'll have some chance to answer those as a big group or in those smaller breakout rooms, like I mentioned. So that's a little preview of our evening together. And at this time, I will hand it off to my colleague and birder extraordinaire, Ryan DeGadio, to share more about Point Blue.
Thanks, Bonnie. Hi, everyone. So in addition to marking the 10-year anniversary of RMN in 2025, our organization, Point Blue, celebrated its 60th anniversary in 2025. And in honor of passing this milestone, we thought it'd be fun to present a short history on Point Blue. Note that with all the ground we have to cover tonight around RMN, this needs to be a lightning talk, so apologies if I talk fast or gloss over details. First, a quick introduction for our organization. We were founded in 1965. Our mission is to conserve birds, other wildlife, and their ecosystems through science partnerships and outreach. And we have about 160 conservation professionals working from Alaska to Chile, from the Sierra to the sea, and all the way down in Antarctica. So by now you've probably gathered that we haven't always been called Point Blue. Our name was originally the Point Reyes Bird Observatory, also known as PRBO. And as with other bird observatories, we're focused on birds. Specifically, we tracked populations and studied bird migration for a long time. Little bit of background on bird observatories. They've been around Europe since the late 1800s, but PRBO was the first North American bird observatory west of the Mississippi. Now, we all know that birds are excellent indicators of environmental change, and PRBO leaned into this early on and started using bird science and ecological monitoring to inform and advance conservation. Eventually, we started to use the term conservation science to better describe our work. To accommodate our growth as an organization, we moved our headquarters out of Point Reyes into Petaluma in 2006. And in 2013, we changed our name to Point Blue, which was part of an intentional shift towards a more ecosystem-based conservation. and also to let people know that we didn't just focus on birds and we didn't just work in Point Reyes. In the 2000s, we started to focus more on the ecological impacts of climate change. And in 2014, we aligned our strategic plan around the theme of climate smart conservation, an approach that aims to help ecosystems adapt and respond to climate change. And while we still embrace this approach, in 2025, we created a new strategic plan that focuses on what we call connected conservation, which emphasizes working with communities to make sure that our conservation solutions are also meeting the needs of people. And a little story on this old black and white photo. This is a picture of Rich Stallcup in 1965. And at the time, he was our only paid field biologist. All the other people working at PRBO were volunteers. And for those of you who didn't know Rich, he went on to become a legendary birder and naturalist. And sadly, Rich passed away in 2012, but his legacy lives on in many ways. And so after this initial year of 1965, we started out at it was an old ranch house out in the newly formed Point Reyes National Seashore, but we found a better location down at the southern end of the Point Reyes National Seashore at the Palomarin Field Station. And Palomarin, Palo for short, it's our longest running program. And it's much more than just science and data, though. It's also a place of learning. We've trained thousands of early career biologists through our internship program, including international interns from over 22 countries. Many of our interns have gone on with careers in conservation, including several of us in the Working Lands group. This field crew photo from the early 80s includes one of the founders and, well, instigators of our Working Lands group, Jeff Geipel. If you can't spot Jeff, he's in the middle back row. And here's just a quick peek of what bird banding looks like, shown here. Extracting a bird from the net is Sam Rapp, who's one of our partner biologists in the Working Lands group. And now moving along to the Farallon Islands, we first set foot on the Farallons in 1968, and we never left. Point Blue biologists have been living and working on the Farallons every day for the past 58 years. A lot of stories to be told about the Farallons, but just one thing I'll mention, that data collected here was instrumental for some major conservation wins, including the ban on gillnet fishing in 1994 after we documented rapid declines of the island seabirds. Now moving further afield, Point Blue biologists have been studying penguins and the sea ice ecosystem in Antarctica since 1972. Our work here allowed us to provide a leadership role in the establishment of the world's largest marine protected area in 2017. Back in California, we've been studying the California gull nesting colony at Mona Lake since 1982. This data contributed to the State Water Board's decision to limit water diversions and restore Mona Lake. Now, I've given just a few examples on how our science is used or has been used to inform policy and conservation actions, and there are many more of these stories to tell, especially around the science of restoration. But we don't just do the science, we also do the restoration. Since 1992, Point Blue's straw program, students and teachers restoring a watershed, has planted more than 100,000 native plants and has had more than 80,000 volunteers. This is also an example of this connected conservation theme I mentioned earlier. Another great example of connected conservation can be seen in how our Working Lands team engages with communities across California. We know that agricultural lands like rangelands are important for supporting ecosystems and biodiversity, but we also recognize these lands contribute to our food systems, our local economies, and to people's livelihoods. To better understand rangeland ecosystems, our teams partnered with ranchers and land stewards across the state, which will hopefully lead to improved outcomes all around. And central to this work is our Rangeland Monitoring Network. And with that, coming full circle, I'll pass it back to Bonnie. Thanks all.
Thank you, Ryan. Hopefully that gives everyone a better picture of our organization and our history and where we are headed next. As we move into the tour of the story map, our team will take turns highlighting its various sections. We wanted to find a creative way to share what we have learned since we launched RMN in 2014. And for those who don't know, a story map might be a little jargony term. A story map is an ArcGIS platform. It's an interactive data platform that allows us to show or demonstrate regional trends in all of the RMN metrics that we measure. And anybody will be able to find and use this tool on Point Blue's website. So thanks for launching that story map. And here we go with a little tour.
We are really excited to share this new tool with you that helps us tell the story of the Rangeland Monitoring Network and explore the data in an accessible format. The StoryMap production was funded through 2 USDA NRCS Grazing Lands Conservation Initiative grants in partnership with the North Coast Soil Hub and led by 2 of our wonderful staff, Mel Preston and Alicia Herrera. Data analysis for the story map was led by our RMN team, including Sophie Noda, Dr. Erica Foster, Mel Preston, Ryan DeGaudio, Haley Strom, and Krista Finucci. This data has been collected by over 20 Point Blue partner biologists and field technicians who are skilled botanists and avian ecologists who also happen to be good at soil sampling. We would really like to express our gratitude to all of our rancher partners who have opened their gates to us, allowing us to collect ecological data on the land they steward to check up on the health of California's rangelands. Without their partnership, we would not have such an insight into the millions of acres of privately stewarded grazing lands in California. That's what makes RMN unique, a voluntary program designed to collect data and measure ecological function on private lands. RMN is a network of land stewards and scientists working together to improve rangeland ecosystems through science-based conservation planning and on-the-ground action to benefit wildlife, people, and working landscapes. Over the last 10 years, our team of partner biologists and field techs have worked with ranchers on over 140 ranches in 28 counties in California, covering over 200,000 acres. Our work takes place in 4 ecoregions: the Sierra Nevada and Great Basin, the Central Valley of California, the foothills of the Central Valley and coastal mountains, and the Coast Range and coastal prairie. Before passing the mic to my fellow colleagues, I'd like to highlight that over the past 10 years, our data set shows that while carbon stocks overall have declined during drought conditions, California's soils still store vast amounts of carbon, that with the greatest amounts in cooler and wetter regions. We've also observed a plant community of non-native and native plant species, and that grazed landscapes reduce encroachment of invasive plants and promote native plant populations and increased species diversity. And our biologists have recorded over 248 species of birds utilizing these private ranches during the breeding season. These grazing lands are critical to protecting biodiversity and supporting wildlife in human communities across California.
Next is measuring ecological function, which helps explain how we measure and interpret soil, plant, and wildlife metrics. If you scroll down, you can toggle through each subsection to learn more about the monitoring protocols, types of data that are collected, and a depth of information about these metrics. The Monitoring Change Over Time section walks through an example of how RMN data can be used at the ranch scale. The slider tool provides a visual example of what we might observe in a degraded landscape, such as high levels of bare ground, compacted soils, or high cover of invasive species, versus some of the things we may observe in a healthy or restored landscape. This may be familiar to RMN participants who have received a landowner letter from a Point Blue partner biologist that details specific changes over time on their property in the context of their ecoregion. This leads into the next section, which shows a table of the most common conservation practices we recommend and how they connect directly to different RMN metrics. In the case studies section is where we can learn about specific partnerships with RMN. So the 3 stories here come from demonstration ranches, and we're really excited to build this section out more in the future to showcase what we've learned or highlight specific projects on different properties. If you're a rancher who would like to share about your partnership with Point Blue or how your stewardship has evolved, we would love to work with you to get it shared on this map. And now I'm going to pass it over to Erica Foster, Point Blue's Director of Soil Research and Conservation, who will be covering the next sections.
Thank you, Krista. We're happy to be here celebrating a decade of data and partnership. My soils team and I, especially Dr. Lisa Ish, have contributed to the interpretation of the below-ground data set over the past decade. As Bonnie mentioned, we have experienced declines in the total amount of carbon stored from 0 to 40 centimeters across the network. Our ranch carbon stocks demonstrate the diversity of soils across the state, as the amount of surface carbon ranges from 4 all the way to 60 metric tons of carbon per hectare. That's up to 24 tons per acre. And then if we go down another foot from 10 to 40 centimeters, we observe stocks from 15 all the way up to 230 megagrams of carbon per hectare, or up to 90 tons per acre. Across our network alone, this amounts to 2.6 million metric tons just in the surface 10 centimeters. In the first graph here, we are analyzing the soil organic carbon stocks, the amount of carbon per area, to 10 centimeters. There's quite a bit to digest here, and it's all described in the text on the left. And the take-home message is in orange along the bottom. Soil organic carbon stocks are declining across all 3 regions, most significantly in the central California foothills and coastal mountains and the Coast Range region. You'll note that along the x-axis we have growing seasons 1, 2, and 3. This ranges from 2014 to 2022, and notably growing season 1 and 3, the summer and fall of 14 and 21, were some of the most extensive cases of exceptional drought across the state. Overall, you'll also notice that the Coast Range contains higher surface soil organic carbon stocks, and you can keep scrolling to find out why. Primarily changes in precipitation and higher temperatures that alter plant productivity and carbon inputs below ground, as well as decomposition rates and carbon losses. That is why the Coast Range has higher carbon stocks. Higher precipitation leads to productive plants, and cooler temperatures allow for retention of carbon, slowing decomposition almost like a refrigerator. Although there is not a management that can magically increase our precipitation or change atmospheric temperature, if you keep scrolling, we have a few recommendations for increasing and maintaining carbon and soil health for you to explore. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these, such as keep the soil covered, minimize disturbance, encourage diversity, maintain living roots, and integrate livestock. These practices also serve to maintain healthy soil structure, which our network measures via bulk density. The final graph of this section examines soil compaction via a measurement of dry soil weight over soil volume, which relates to water storage and movement through the soil. Overall, as bulk densities decline, we see less compaction and improvement in soil health. All of these compaction indicators are within the healthy range ideal for plant growth. So with that, this final soil figure, let's now take a look at our vegetation data.
The California rangelands we work in are dominated by non-native annual grasses such as ryegrass, oats, and bromes, which provide important forage for livestock.
Not sure what happened, but our
Here on the
video
vegetation
crashed
data tab, you can see
on
the
my
top
end.
10 species in our data set,
No?
9 of which are annual grasses.
Still going?
In contrast, most plant diversity on these rangelands comes from native forbs, or wildflowers, including rare and endangered species found across the grasslands, vernal pools, coastal prairies, oak savannas, and oak woodlands in which we work. You can see photos of some of the native wildflowers that occur on our RMN ranches by scrolling down. We have observed over 1,000 plant species across the network over the past 10 years of RMN, from 717 points on about 140 unique ranches. Down here, you can see how functional group cover has changed over time among the ranches who have been monitored 3 times, starting in the first few years of RMN. Functional groups are helpful categorizations because they group plants based on how they function on the landscape. For example, perennial grasses have deep roots that retain water, store carbon, and stabilize soils, whereas annual grasses have relatively shallow roots and complete their life cycle in one growing season. Annual forbs and perennial forbs are wildflowers. Their seeds are long-lived in the seed bank and germinate when the conditions are favorable for survival. Forbs on rangelands are crucial forage for pollinators. Legumes are our friends in the pea family, and they play an important ecological role by fixing nitrogen. Sedges and rushes have a similar function to perennial grasses, but they typically are limited to wetter locations. Across our network, we observe declines in 3 widespread invasive species: yellow star thistle, medusa head, and barb goatgrass. These declines are likely driven by a combination of active management, including invasive species control, prescribed grazing, and prescribed fire, and natural disturbances such as wildfire, and are expected to improve forage quality and plant diversity. If you have received a land owner letter from us, you may be interested in knowing more about the plants in your region. From the vegetation data page, you can click on your ecoregion to find the top 10 plant species, as well as plant functional group cover in your region. Our ongoing and future analyses of RMN aim to better understand vegetation patterns and the drivers of plant community change across the rangelands we study.
California's rangelands are helping buck national bird declines by providing vital habitat. We've recorded an impressive 248 bird species across California's rangelands. Even better, many of our key oak woodland and grassland birds are holding steady or even increasing in number. These are especially positive results considering that bird populations across North America, especially grassland birds, are declining at an alarming rate. A 2019 study estimated that the continent has lost nearly 3 billion birds since 1970, or a quarter of the total bird population. While California's rangelands can't reverse these national trends alone, our data show they're playing an important role by offering vital habitat across vast working landscapes. The bird data page of our story map shows the top 10 birds in our network statewide. The most abundant bird is the oak titmouse, shown here in the image gallery, and you can scroll down to see the list of species written out. These top 10 data come from 2,375 points on 174 transects, and they represent a decade of bird survey efforts across the state's rangelands. However, bird communities vary quite a bit by ecoregion, and if you have received a landowner letter from our monitoring program, you are most likely interested in knowing more about the birds in your area rather than the whole state. From the bird data page, you can click on your ecoregion to find the top 10 birds, as well as bird focal species. For instance, if we click to the Foothills Top 10 Birds section, we find that oak titmouse are the most abundant species, followed by ash-throated flycatcher. If we scroll down below the top 10 species, we can see figures of focal species abundance over time, separated out by habitat preferences. These figures show data from the same set of monitoring points for each sampling event, making this an equal comparison over time. If we scroll further down to grassland focal species of the foothills, we can see that western meadowlarks seem to have increased over the last decade, which is quite interesting and a trend we are currently investigating further. And while you're doing a tour of the bird data, don't forget to listen to a bird recording for your ecoregion, which can be found at the bottom of each ecoregion description section. We'll take a moment to listen to the iconic song of the western meadowlark, which many of you have probably heard out on the rangelands.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for contributing to that story map video tour. For those who joined a little bit later, we will be sharing this with you so you can have a chance to look at it again. As we move into this next section, if you have questions about what was shared in the story map presentation about RMN or the various results, please add those questions to the chat and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. Additionally, the story map features a resources page for your exploration and links to science publications derived from the RMN dataset. The story map wraps with a special acknowledgement section to highlight our thanks and gratitude to our primary funders of the Rangeland Monitoring Network. And we wanted to give a special shout out to TomKat Ranch Educational Foundation for their support and vision in creating the Rangeland Monitoring Network over a decade ago, and for your support of the working lands and soils teams in our efforts to provide technical assistance to ranchers. As you explore the story map on your own, we hope that it sparks curiosity about some of the regional patterns that we've observed and cultivates deeper questions that can help us inform the next generation of RMN, what we will do together in the next 10 years. We really want this protocol and tool to be as useful as possible to everyone we partner with. As we move into this next decade of RMN, we hope to lean into the network element of this program by creating community together as we learn from each other. Over the last decade, we've done a few rounds of network-wide data analysis that's been really interesting and great for us as rangeland ecologists, but it has made us realize that we're really missing the connection between ecological data and grazing management data. And this special data set is one we can only build in partnership with the ranchers and land stewards that we work with. So to help us begin unpeeling the onion that is rangeland science, we've invited a few of our rancher partners here to share their experience with RMN, how they approach land stewardship, and what questions they might have and where we can go together. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to these three folks. We have Carrie Richards coming from Yuba County, Byron Palmer from Sonoma County, and Billy Freeman from Fresno County. If the three of you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, you could share where you call home and work and how long you've been ranching and partnering with Point Blue. Carrie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I'm Carrie Richards. I run my family's ranch in Yuba County. It's in a town called Oregon House, California. No one's ever heard of it, and that's okay. We run 6,500 acres there, and we also have a CPG beef company called Richards Regenerative. We have been working with Point Blue since 2017, I believe, when I moved up to the ranch to start running it with my family. My NRCS person introduced me to Kate Howard, and she was a fireball and helped me map my whole property, and it's been a really great partnership with Point Blue ever since.
Thanks, Carrie. Billy, how about you go next?
Hey everyone, I'm Billy Freeman with Sierra Foothill Conservancy in the Sierra Foothills just outside of the beautiful God's country of Fresno, California. Saw a few people on Zoom land here that I know, Brian, Diane, Gary, Mel, John, Alicia, Wendell, Katie, and Bonnie. Thanks so much for having me. I think we've been partnering with Point Blue since about 2013 or 14 is when we started. I think that's what Bonnie told me earlier today. So we've had a lot of success, a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of experience, a lot of conference presentations, and a lot of other activities with them. It's been quite a journey.
Thanks, Billy. Go ahead, Byron.
Yeah, everybody. Billy, that was impressive. You just named everybody you knew. You're making me self-conscious there. That was pretty good. My name's Byron Palmer. I'm the grazing manager, Sonoma Mountain Institute. We are located, surprise, surprise, on Sonoma Mountain, east of Petaluma. We have the designation as the smallest mountain in California, if you are tracking that statistic. And what was the next part of that question? How long we've been working with Point Blue, Bonnie? Yeah. I've been with SMI since 2013, and I think, I was on Mitsui Ranch. We were managing that shortly after. So I want to say like over a decade, been messing around with Wendell and hanging out with his sharpshooter shovel and asking questions, doing stuff. And then you guys are involved in a number of the properties that we manage, Ryan and the team and Sophie, Erica, like everybody's done a bunch of great work. So yeah, it's been a great partnership.
Thanks. Well, I'm very appreciative of the three of you joining this conversation with me. Carrie, I think we'll start with you. You touched a little bit on it in your introduction, but can you share about how you learned about Point Blue and what got you excited about working with us?
Yeah, like I said, we had an NRCS contract that I inherited when I moved to the ranch. And when I met with my NRCS people, Kate came from Point Blue and introduced me to the basically the monitoring network and doing soil samples and basically all the things that you guys do. But I had no idea what that meant for me. Like it all ended up working out because I ended up with baseline data that I could use for my ecological outcome verified program that I did later with Savory. But at the time, I kind of was just like a yes person. I was like, sure, let's count birds. Let's do soil samples. This all sounds really amazing. And when I got the data, it was really amazing. My first landowner letter, it was very thorough. And it was very insightful because I was taking over the ranch from my dad. And it was just a really good zoomed in and zoomed out reflection of where our property was at that time. So yeah, it's been a great relationship. We've done 5 rounds of monitoring, I think, since. So we've got some pretty extensive data, and we're seeing things change for better and for worse all over the property, and every couple of years it's different. So yeah, it's been really exciting.
Awesome. Um, yeah. Is there anything in particular that like jumped out at you? Like what have you been most excited to learn about over the years of the monitoring?
Yeah, when I had, I think Carrie compiled some of my data for me, and I have a field that has the species richness was really high. And it's just interesting when you get the data back from these pastures that you've walked through 100,000 times. And you're like, really? That area is like the special area? So learning these different pockets of our ranch and how like to me, like this one pocket looks great because it grows really well, but actually it only has a few grasses in it. It's actually not that rich and diverse. And so just those kind of bits of information I would get over the years have been really insightful. And also learning about how to manage for invasive species. That's been really difficult because with goat grass and Medusa head, fire is a great thing to use, but it's also a very scary thing to use. And so just kind of like figuring out ways around that and not using fire in the season that you can't use fire, which is almost the entire year now, basically.
Yeah, well, cool. Thanks for sharing about that and your experience there. Let's see, Byron, I'm going to move over to you and ask you a couple questions about your management style. Can you share about your grazing regime or how you approach things and how that fits well in the ecology of the region where you work?
Yeah. Also, I just want to say I really appreciated Carrie's like some things are trending well, some things are trending not. And that's definitely my experience as well. And it's just, yeah, like yes. Yeah, I would say our grazing management style is informed by holistic management and ranching for profit. It's probably, holistic management adjacent, but it's right sized for our experience here in a Mediterranean climate and the monitoring data we've seen over the years and how it relates to our management actions. So we have a pretty adaptive and flexible grazing regime. We definitely plan at the beginning of the year, and then, we're adjusting the plan real time. My team, a number of the guys who are on the call, we're taking photos, we're looking at it as a team, and we're adjusting. Similar to probably Billy and Carrie, we're using the tools of density, rest, timing, herd effect, and how we use those tools really changes during the season that we choose to graze in. So specifically, like in answer to your question about ecology, we graze in winter and spring, specifically because the lack of protein in the grass in the summer is just a pretty significant nutritional impact. It makes everything else we do harder. So we design flexibility into our system. We get essentially right around 14 loads of cattle between December and February, and then across like our ranch complex. And then we have the ability to call up like 40% more or 6 more loads by March 1. And that really allows us to see what kind of rain season we're in, because you guys all probably remember like 2020, 2021. It's like you start out with a bunch of rain in some of these scenarios, and then you get a bifurcated rain season of 65 days. And that screws you on your rotation if you're 60 days out from rain and you're coming around. So yeah, it's really adaptive. I think the last part is we just vary our density quite a bit. Like if we get 4 inches of rain in February, we're not going to be at ultra high density because the ground's plastic and we're going to make a muddy mess and it's going to take like decades to recover. So in the winter, we have the cattle more spread out, maybe an 8-day rotation. And then, in May, ground's harder, tighter rotations, maybe 4-day with a lot of variation in there.
Cool. Yeah, I think you were kind of getting into some of my next question about how does the science-driven management help you achieve your goals, and how are you tracking that? And is RMN helping you track some of those metrics? And then as, from you as a manager, land steward perspective, what other questions could Point Blue, or would you hope that Point Blue would start investigating as your science partner?
It's a big picture question on
Big
that.
loaded question
Yeah,
for
yeah,
you.
no, for sure. If you got a drink, I'd sip it. No, I'll do it quick. Uh, so I think when you're talking about management goals, like, and how the science is helping me achieve management goals, I'm an operator by nature. And so I think about goals it's hard for me to think about them not in the absence of constraints, and that sort of limits my vision sometimes. But, I've got a lot of constraints like everybody here. We've got financial constraints, time constraints. Right now, I should probably be at my daughter's jujitsu practice. And ecological monitoring specifically can help me tell where to focus my time and effort. In a world that has finite time and dollars, that really, 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 really matters to me because I don't like doing dumb shit many times in a row. And I think, thinking about what our science partners could do or what Point Blue could do to help, I think you already did you've done this a lot, and you've done a version of it, which I love recently, that paper that y'all collaborated on and put out on carbon, on specifically carbon storage. I can't remember the title because it's way too late, but basically showing that oak tree regeneration as a carbon sequestration technique was not as causal as actually soil mineralogy, and that calcium and iron were a better predictor of carbon sequestration. So anyone that's planted a lot of trees and kept them alive, and there's a lot of people on this call have, if one of your primary goals was to sequester carbon, it would be pretty fucking handy to know that soil mineralogy actually level sets what's possible. So papers like that matter to me. And so specifically, I would say doing exactly the same thing for grazing management, but in a more nuanced way, right? So connecting grazing management data and records like timing of rotations, duration of rest, amount of density, to ecological outcomes, whether they be vegetation biodiversities, increases, perennial increases or decreases, native bird populations, like correlation of anything, because then I can go to my neighbor and say, hey, maybe you don't need to attend 25 conferences and read this big ass green book and like completely change who you think you are. But in a sub 15-inch precip year, if you don't overstock and you focus on these pastures with density for 2 months, like you can get 80% of the benefit. And that means adoption would be a lot easier because people throw their hands up and they're like, why isn't everyone doing this thing that's the best? It's because the results are unclear, it's really hard and expensive, and we're not sure exactly what's going on. So I think that work, if you could do that, would help with adoption.
Thanks, Byron.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to dig into that a little bit more in our grazing group collaborative that we've started. But yeah, thanks for sharing that with the group. Billy, I'm wondering from your perspective, if there was anything that resonated from Byron or Carrie that you wanted to speak about, or you could share a little bit about your approach as a rangeland manager, both as the rangeland program manager for SFC, supporting grazing management on easements for the land trust, and then also running your own livestock operation for the land trust.
Yeah, I would say, with Carrie, I'm really impressed with what she's been able to do with her family operation because I know that a lot of times it's hard to make changes over time with multiple generation, operations, and I really respect that. And with Byron, I think that one thing he touched on, which is really important, is just having the flexibility to vary the stocking rate at different times of year, depending on rainfall, depending on the goals and objectives of the operation. So I think that was really important. Oh, hey, Melissa Odell, good to see you. It's getting late in Montana. Didn't see you there. Yeah. So, at SFC with our rangeland program, we've worn many different hats. With the cattle operations specifically, we have grazed on lands that are owned by Sierra Foothill Conservancy. We have also leased pastures or rangelands that are owned by other landowners, specifically conservation easement landowners. And then we also have part of our lands that we lease out to other local ranchers. And so we get to play several different roles when it comes to managing the grazing on the lands that are considered conservation lands through Sierra Foothill Conservancy. And I would say the main differences between, our management and what we're able to accomplish on lands that, we own and graze versus lands that we lease is, oftentimes, when you're leasing a pasture, you don't quite have full control over the grazing because of constraints of the landowner or facilities or infrastructure. You're not able to be fully invested in the ecological goals that you want to there because of those constraints. And sometimes you just don't have the resources or you have financial constraints because of the fees that you're paying for the leasing, et cetera. Uh, Contrast that to, lands that are owned by Sierra Foothill Conservancy that we're grazing ourselves through our cattle operation. In that case, we do have full control over the grazing. We are fully invested in the conservation outcomes there. We do have more resources to invest in the grazing operations that we're doing there. And we have fewer financial constraints because we're not paying grazing lease fees. And so I think those are some of the key things that are different between the two scenarios. And so what we've decided to move forward doing predominantly with our cattle operation is to therefore focus on the lands that are owned in fee title by SFC. And that's where we've been able to make the greatest amount of impact with the grazing. And for example, we've been doing quite a few restoration projects on a lot of those lands. We can talk about that too. Some are funded by Point Blue Roots program, but what we've been investigating on some of those lands is how can we co-manage restoration plantings with continuing to graze those areas so we can still have some beneficial animal impact while still being able to plant native species and restore these ecosystems as well.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I was just one other thing, Billy, that I was wondering if you could share about how, we started working together in 2013 with Melissa at Bean Creek and then me at Feingold and McKenzie in 2014. We approached our conservation planning using RMN as kind of the foundation for that. Can you speak a little bit about how you incorporated that data into your conservation plans for these different properties that SFC owns and manages?
Yeah, the conservation planning process with Point Blue was really invaluable for us. We, just took over grazing some of those lands and we needed to establish what our ecological objectives were going to be. And we worked with Bonnie and Wendell on that. They came out and we walked the land and we started talking about those things. And we'd ask them, what should be our objectives here, guys? And Wendell would say, no, you have to define what the objectives are for your land. And then we can help you define, what practices or approaches that you could take. And that was a really valuable thing. And, they did a lot of baseline monitoring through the Rangeland Monitoring Network and sort of let us know where we were versus where we wanted to go. And then we could really design our programs after that. From there, we've been able to do many other projects with Point Blue. As I mentioned, we've done some pretty extensive restoration work through the Point Blue Roots program. We've also got a healthy soils program demonstration site where we've been doing some rangeland compost application. Point Blue's doing a lot of the monitoring. Brian Fagundes is been working extremely hard on that with us. We've also done quite a few outreach activities with Point Blue, presenting at several conferences, and also through what we call the Rancher to Rancher Network, which has been a really cool program that we've been involved with several other ranchers and rangeland ecologists around the state, where we go ranch to ranch and we gather local producers. And it's kind of a peer-to-peer learning outreach day where we walk the land, we see what's working, what's not working, and we practice listening to the land and listening to each other. And so that's been a really cool program to be a part of. We've also participated in the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program. Point Blue's involved with that. So quite a few different things that have kind of stemmed out of the original involvement with Point Blue that have been really cool.
Cool, thank you. I kind of want to open up the next couple of questions to all three of you, or if there are other ranchers on the call that would like to answer any of these, that would be great too. You could use the hand raise feature. But thinking about the larger context of California as a whole, how how do you see Point Blue's rangeland science efforts best influencing like policy at the state level that could improve outcomes for you as a livestock operator or land steward? It's kind of a big question, but we want to be of service in our science, make it useful. So.
Billy, Carrie, one of you guys want to go first?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I think one of the big things is just getting public perception continuing to go in the right direction so that people know that ranchers aren't the bad guy. You know, they're not out here trying to degrade landscapes. We work with multi-generation landowners that are excellent stewards of their lands, and honestly, they're the best people to be out there managing those lands. And further, I think anything that Point Blue can do to get the public perception to continue to realize that, you know, ranching and livestock management, you know, is really important to local communities and it's part of the community. And, you know, hopefully people can have more patience for cows crossing the road and things like that. And so they won't try to run you over while you're moving stuff across and things like that in the future. I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, almost like a PR program highlighting kind of maybe Point Blue's aha moments that they've seen in their data, or highlighting certain ecoregions that they've seen amazing change in, and working with the local governments there to talk about in a bigger way, a bigger audience on what you've found and what's worked. Um, I think would be really helpful because there's no one that I know of, unless you're on this call and I don't see you. There's no one in my county really doing a ton with Point Blue that I know of besides myself, maybe a sprinkling of others. But I know that if I could amplify my story, my success story about working with Point Blue, that we would get more people involved and more people excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, just to chime in, I I feel like explaining to people the function of herbivory, cow neutral, is a really important thing. So just even looking at the Palo Marin Field Station, I think grazing has been withheld there over time around it in certain places. Maybe I'm not 100% right on that, but like looking at that change over time. But I find when I get into these conversations with people, rather than trying to convince them about the value of cattle or ranching, I'm like, let's talk about herbivory and the function of it in a grassland, and so I think that could be pretty handy, like reframing the conversation about herbivory, and then we can talk if we want, 10,000 tule elk in downtown Petaluma. We can have that conversation next. And then I think the other one, Bonnie, this is kind of like an outlier, but I think with the changes with climate change and weather and water, if I could wave a magic wand on policy, being able to do more earthworks on my land to retain water. And I realize that's a big ask, and you can't necessarily change policy on the water board, but like being able to put in swales for retention, ponds to increase residency periods of different herps and provide access for cattle, but like that would be a game changer, because if you need a permit to do an in-stream BDA, like it really keeps grading the land from being an easy thing to do, or even, so work around that would be meaningful to myself and our crew and probably many watersheds.
Wow, that was awesome because you're the second person to tell me that today. Like very specifically stock ponds when I asked them that question earlier was his immediate answer. Are there any other ranchers on the call that want to chime in about that or have questions about anything else for these three panelists or for the RMN team?
I think Diane was raising her hand, but we can't hear you, Diane.
Oh, go ahead, Diane. Sorry, I missed your hand raise. Let's see if I can unmute you maybe as the host. Or Sophie, can you unmute her? I think you're the host. Oh, there you go. Got it.
Oh, I hit the button. I think that I've been working with the NRCS and Point Blue for many, many years, probably 10 or 15. I'm a fifth generation cattle rancher, and so I'm in it for life. But I think that one of the things is the plan that the Point Blue has helped me to create has helped me with things like the biosecurity plan that I work on. It has also helped with opportunities, and it has made it to where I can justify things that I think are a good thing to do. And so I appreciate your time and effort in all the work you've done.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I'm so glad you were able to join too. It's great to see you. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
I got a question for Billy. You're doing some grazing management of your own, and then you've got some folks that you lease out to. And are you doing biological monitoring on both those properties? And if so, do you see any variation in results? If you were, when I say results, I mean like responses in the plant or bird or whatever you're monitoring community between your management type and their management types?
Yes, we are doing biological monitoring through Point Blue's RMN network on both of those sites, and probably even more extensive monitoring on the sites that we're managing ourselves. But I would say the biggest difference that we've noticed between the two management styles has been abundance of perennial grass species, I would say is one thing. And just overall biodiversity, I think, has been improved on the lands that we're managing ourselves. Also, the lands that we're managing have a lot more extensive riparian areas. And one of the things that we've seen is just a lot more increase of abundance and regeneration of cottonwood, willow species, sedges, rushes, and those stream banks that were, very degraded and in size are now starting to aggregate and starting to lift up and rebuild, and slopes being revegetated. So those have been some really exciting things to see.
Any other questions for our panelists?
Looked like there was a comment in the chat from Colleen. You want to call that out?
Yeah. Colleen, if you're able to unmute and you feel comfortable, you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'll briefly touch on it. We're probably, most of us are, at least I am in Sonoma County, reporting to the State Water Resources Control Board and the new Cal Water system, as well as the water quality permit for grazing operations. And as a result of that, I've had some long conversations with folks that are steering ranchers to handle those challenges. And we were when you talked earlier about public perception, I think that the local communication in all of California is important, and the public perception piece, especially under the threat of DXE. So it's a very real challenge, and the effort to slow it down in Sonoma County obviously was successful, but there's a true emphasis on this going statewide, and something that needs to unify farmers and ranchers. So it's a question and it's a comment, but it's really to underscore the need for public perception and education.
Yeah, thank you so much for expanding on that, Colleen. Erica, there was some dialogue in the chat. I don't know if you are up for summarizing some of that, but it may be interesting to share with the whole group before we launch into our breakout rooms.
Great. Sure. Thanks, Bonnie. I responded because I knew that there would be quite a few details I wanted to include. So it was just a question from Aaron about soil carbon influences and the driving factors between those differences in stocks. And so just looking at those trends, the question was around what other factors we examined. And so there was a whole slew of soil variables that we looked at, as well as plant functional group and richness and cover and presence of woody species, and then topography as well, including aspect and hill position, et cetera. And so Chelsea Carey led that research paper that was published almost 5 years ago now. So we're in progress to redo the analysis. And rather than just looking at stocks, we're going to be looking at those changes over time also to see what influences these trends across the network that we're seeing. And then I'll also just note that we did see differences in ecoregions. So next question was kind of unpacking patterns along the Central Coast. And in this area specifically, we saw that texture, so the percent sand, silt, and clay in the soil really impacted how variable soil carbon stocks were across that region. And so as Byron mentioned this also, that soil chemistry and basic soil properties can play a role in how much carbon a soil can store. And we're still working to untangle management impacts specifically. And so we're working to continue collecting grazing management data more formally across the network. And then we're also launched a new protocol. Some folks might have been part of this launch as well and contributed to the protocol design. But our ag conservation monitoring program is mapped specifically onto practices. And so if there's a perennial grass planting or riparian planting or prescribed grazing, for example, that monitoring program is designed specifically to track practice impact. So it's nice to see some faces on the call who participated in some of those projects as well. So that's an ongoing analysis, and we're really excited to dive further into that with this next year of sampling.
Thank you for that explanation, Erica. And yes, Diane, I see your comment. Studies in high montane areas would be helpful for my operation. You know, that's interesting, Diane, because many of the ranchers that we work with in the Sierra foothills also have grazing leases in the national forest. And we haven't yet tapped into that partnership potential, but it could be interesting, I think, as an ecologist to look at what's happening in the foothills at the home ranches and how those are connected to the upper watersheds in the high areas where you all graze as well. Byron, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up on something that Erica was saying about that analysis and the connecting of different management practices to outcomes. First, that's super exciting. And you didn't put a plug in for the Western Rangeland Grazing Data Collective, like 15 other acronyms that come after that about the grazing data space and data sovereignty. And, you know, also I think you guys are going to try and repatriate Greenland. Like there's a lot of different goals you have, but specifically, like when you talk about targeted grazing or prescribed grazing, and I know everyone knows this, but I just want to say it out loud. Like grazing is not a binary thing, and there's so much variation, and in the variation is the information we need, because in the variation are cost structures and friction and effort. And so like understanding the actual variation and the nuance there is so important. So I know you're already on that, Erica, based on many conversations we've already had, but it's like anytime I hear the word prescribed or targeted, I'm like, is that 3 rotations? Is that 4 rotations? Is it somebody from Nebraska that says we should have an ultra high density event with a 450-day rest period? Like, what are we talking about here? You know?
Definitely.
Well, hopefully we can. Oh, go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I was just going to say that kind of to your point, Byron, in terms of the diverse types of grazing practices that exist across RMN and rangelands in California and the West, that we're really trying hard to collect that management information in a really easy and accessible manner, because it's really tough to keep track of in and out dates on every single pasture. And so we're working on ways to categorize and try and assess management data that are much easier to report for producers. So that's a big part of that too. Thanks.
Yeah. And check in with the 3M project, as you know, because they're the only ones I know that are collecting that same kind of data at scale as you guys. So yeah, there's fun to be had there.
Fun indeed. Gary, go ahead. One last question, and then we'll say farewell to those who can't stay. Go ahead, Gary.
All right, thank you. I'm Gary Miltimore. I'm the Stewardship Program Manager for Sierra Folk Conservancy, and I work with Billy Freeman. In terms of policy, continuing the NRCS Point Blue Conservation Partnership, I think is so important. It's led to how we started our relationship, and as conservation easement holders, the partners that we work with, those landowners, we can introduce them to this program as well through our relationship with them to help conserve their lands and to help them better manage their lands. And many of them do not have the resources to effectively manage them. So this partnership is really valuable. I support policy to just keep this moving forward. And I want to thank you guys so much for all you do for SFC.
Thanks, Gary. All right. Well, we did plan this meeting this evening from 5:30 to 6:30 and left it optional for folks who want to stay and keep the conversation going in smaller groups. Part of Nerd Night is really geared around the social element, and we're going to do our best here in the Zoom format and launch breakout rooms. So for those who can't stay, we'll say farewells now, and thank you so much for joining us. Lishka, if at this time you would launch the Zoom rooms, we will go over there. There will be a Point Blue host in each room to guide some conversation about where we all come from and have a chance to look at the story map some more together and answer any other questions that you might have. So at this time, Lishka, if you would launch the Zoom rooms, we will see you all shortly. I think we have everyone back. Thank you all so much for joining tonight, our second virtual Nerd Night ever. And maybe we'll start doing these more regularly going forward, because this was fun to bring together so many people from across the network. I hope you all enjoyed it and got to have some interesting conversations in your breakout rooms. And without further ado, I will just say one last thing. If you have something, please follow up with me. If you have a question, I will get you connected with the right person to answer it. Otherwise, have a great evening, and thank you all.
Thank you, Bonnie, and everyone.
Bonnie. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Point Blue.
Thanks all.
Good evening.
Appreciate you.